The storm didn't ask permission before locking them together. One moment the mountain road was only wet and quiet, the next it was swallowed by white wind and falling trees, and the last working radio crackled into silence. By the time the door of the cabin slammed shut behind them, they both understood the same frightening truth: no one was coming tonight, and whatever happened inside these walls would change them forever. He was a single father named Adam, used to carrying groceries with one arm and worry with the other. She was Mira, a CEO whose name moved markets and whose decisions affected thousands, yet here she stood with snow in her hair and fear she couldn't delegate away. The cabin was old but sturdy, smelling of pine and cold ash, with one bed, a narrow couch, and a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. Outside, the wind howled like it was angry at the world. Inside, two strangers tried to pretend they weren't terrified. Adam moved first, because fathers always do. He checked the windows, pushed furniture against the door, and found dry wood stacked neatly by the hearth. His hand shook when he struck the match, not because he didn't know what he was doing, but because the thought of his 8-year-old daughter waiting at home kept flashing through his mind. He imagined her bedtime questions, her trust that he would always come back. Mira watched him quietly, noticing how careful he was with everything he touched, as if the world itself might bruise if handled roughly. They didn't talk much at first. The storm spoke enough for everyone. But silence has a way of digging into people, and after a while Mira broke it. She apologized for insisting on taking the mountain route, for believing the weather app instead of the old ranger's warning. Adam shrugged, not unkindly. Blame didn't warm anyone. What did warm the room, slowly, was the fire and the shared understanding that survival now depended on cooperation, not status. As the night deepened, the temperature dropped harder than the market ever could. Myra's expensive coat wasn't made for this kind of cold, and Adam noticed her hands turning pale. He offered his spare sweater without hesitation. She took it, surprised by the simple kindness, surprised even more by how much it meant. Wrapped in his sweater, she looked less like a headline and more like a woman who had been carrying too much alone. They talked then, really talked, the way people do when the world has stripped away all distractions. Adam spoke about losing his wife to illness, about learning how to braid hair and pack lunches and still show up for work with a steady face. Mira spoke about building her company from nothing, about the nights she slept in her office, about the quiet fear that if she ever slowed down, everything would collapse. The fire crackled between them like a witness. Hours passed. The wind refused to rest. When the fire burned low, Adam added wood and spread the only blanket they had on the bed. He insisted Mira take the bed while he stayed on the floor. She refused, pride rising out of habit, but then she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that comes from years of responsibility without relief. They compromised, sitting on opposite ends of the bed, wrapped separately, backs against the wall, the cold one again. It crept through the floorboards and settled into their bones. Mira tried to ignore it, tried to stay composed, but her teeth began to chatter despite her efforts. She stared at the fire, then at Adam, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to admit vulnerability. Her voice was barely louder than the wind when she whispered, "Can I slip under your blanket?" It wasn't a request for closeness so much as a request for safety, and Adam understood that instantly. He nodded, gently, making space without making it awkward. They sat close enough to share warmth, not touching more than necessary, the blanket pulled tight around them like a small shield against a vast storm. In that quiet, something softened inside both of them. Adam felt less alone than he had in years. Mira felt, for the first time, that she didn't have to be unbreakable to be respected. When dawn finally came, it arrived slowly, gray light pressing against the frosted windows. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried but peaceful. They woke stiff and tired, but alive, and somehow changed. Rescue came hours later, a snowmobile and a relieved ranger, but the most important rescue had already happened in that cabin. Here is the truth that keeps people watching until the very last second. Sometimes the strongest connections are forged not by choice, but by circumstance, and the courage to be human in front of another person can be more powerful than any plan. Weeks later, back in their separate lives, neither could forget the other. Adam returned to his routines, but he noticed he smiled more, listened more. Mira returned to boardrooms and deadlines, but she started leaving earlier, asking herself harder questions about what success was costing her. When she invited Adam to coffee, it wasn't out of romance or obligation. It was curiosity, and gratitude, and something hopeful that neither wanted to rush. They talked again, this time without a storm forcing honesty, and discovered that what they shared wasn't just a dramatic memory, but values. Responsibility. Compassion. The understanding that strength doesn't mean standing alone. Mira used her influence to create flexible work programs for single parents in her company. Adam found the courage to apply for a position he'd always thought was out of reach, and got it, because someone finally saw his worth. The hook that carries this story to its end is simple and true: one night of survival can reveal a lifetime of meaning. When Adam tucked his daughter into bed one evening, she asked if he was scared during the storm. He smiled and told her he was, but he learned something important. That even in the coldest moments, sharing warmth can light a fire that lasts far beyond the night. And somewhere in the city, Mira stood by her office window, watching the lights below, no longer feeling trapped by them. She had learned that leadership wasn't about standing above others, but standing with them. The cabin was far away now, but its lesson remained: when life corners you, kindness is not a weakness, and asking for help can be the bravest whisper of all.